I'll see you guys in the dark.
So, I never thought to post this here, until I recently brought it up to my friend who was with me the day that it happened. He agreed that it was pretty freaking weird. Anyhow, about a year and a half ago, my buddy and I were driving down a road near the back of this botanical garden park type area. It was fairly late, like 10 o'clock or so. He was driving, and we were essentially driving alongside the end part of the park with some woods. There's this black gate that they lock up after dark that leads to a long stretch of road going through the middle of the park. As we drove closer to the back gate, which is in the middle of the stretch of the road alongside the woods, we saw a few dudes hanging out by the gate. It was strange. One guy was shirtless and had a man bun and was hanging off the gate kind of like a monkey. The other dude was standing out on the sidewalk looking down at us and began to wave us down. Us being considerate and living in the neighborhood, relatively friendly yet drug-abled suburb of Staten Island in New York City, we pulled over. Something did seem definitely off, but we were in the car and they may have needed some serious help. We rolled down the window, and the guy who waved us down comes up to us, constantly scratching his head and looking genuinely disoriented. He says, "Hey, our friend got hurt and broke her knee on the other side of that gate. Can you call 911 for us or something?" My buddy and I immediately felt like something was up and began to get ready to peel off. "She hurt her knee?" asked my friend in a semi-shaky voice. We began to suspect these guys were heroin addicts, but gave them the benefit of the doubt for a little longer. As the disoriented guy babbled on briefly again about his friend being hurt. But suddenly, the other dude, who was still shirtless, hanging onto the fence and looking into the park, snapped his head back at us, jumped down, ran to us on all fours, and bashed his head into the side of my friend's car. He popped up casually and was speaking fast. Something like, "Yeah, man, come on, guys. We need help. Serious help." Now that he was off the fence and not blocking a big part of it, I actually bothered to look closely at the other side. There was no female or anything at all for that matter in sight. My friend and I got horrified, looked at each other, and he zipped away. As we drove away, he kept shouting at us in a manner that sounded animalistic. So, crackheads by the back gate of one of our neighborhood parks, let's not meet again. This happened when I was 8 or 9 years old, in mid-November, early December. My family had moved to an apartment near the Kelvick docks. My family consists of my, at the time, only 2 brothers. My younger brother, Elliot, who was a year younger, and my youngest brother at the time, James, who couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. My mom and her husband, we spent about a week tidying the place up, meeting the neighbors, and getting used to the new house. One neighbor in particular stands out to me, Jenny. She was scrawny with long black hair, and her skin was sagging a bit, which I assumed was because of old age. One day, she just let herself in and excitedly greeted us. She came to me, knelt down, and said something along the lines of, "Hey, you take Ritalin?" Note, I have ADHD, and I take it to reduce my hyperactivity and improve my concentration. Cool, so do I. Let's be friends. I remember her breath smelled awful. It was like she brushed her teeth with a rotting fish carcass and washed it down with alcohol. She said a quick goodbye before leaving. What couldn't have been more than 10 minutes later, one of our neighbors came down and told us to be careful around Jenny and that she was a drug addict. That's probably why she was so skinny and why she looked older than she was. My mom didn't seem the least surprised. Being as young as I was, I had no idea what they were talking about. All I knew was that she was bad news, and that scared me. Over the next few weeks, Jenny terrorized everyone who lived in the building. She knocked on the door of our apartment on almost a daily basis, and we weren't exactly in a position to ignore the knocking. She had recently threatened an old lady with a baseball bat, and we didn't know what she'd do if we ignored her, and honestly, we didn't want to find out. One day, Jenny came down to us high off her ass and started ranting about how she hated it when siblings fight, and especially when they hit each other. As most of you probably know, every sibling on the damn planet fights from time to time, and as much as I hate to admit it, we weren't above hitting each other either. So James tells Jenny that we hit each other sometimes. I shit you not, the crazy bitch grabs me by the throat and lifts me up and says if you ever do it again, I will fucking kill you. I thought I was going to die at the moment, but after what feels like an eternity, she let me go, only to pick up James and swing the poor guy around like a fucking sword. That was the last straw. My mother called the police soon after, and they took her away. She was released after about 48 hours, at which point it was almost Christmas. Terrified that Jenny would hurt us again, Mom sent Elliot and I to my father's house to spend the rest of our Christmas vacation. James, my mother, and her husband were fine, but I feel extremely guilty that we couldn't take them with us. Jenny was arrested soon after, and I haven't seen her since. I hope it stays that way. So crazy drug addict lady who nearly killed me, you owe me for taking my innocence, so for your sake, let's not meet again. "4 years ago, I was waiting in a busy train station for my friend to arrive, as we were going to a movie together. I was standing by the clock where we agreed to meet when a police officer approached me, and this is how the dialogue went more or less. 'What's a pretty woman doing all by herself here on this fine day?' 'Oh, I'm just waiting for a friend.' 'Oh, your boyfriend?' 'No, just my friend.' 'Oh, do you have a boyfriend? Do you want one?' 'No, thank you. I'm not interested. Besides, I'm into my prom date.' 'But we would be great together.' 'That's not legal. I'm still in high school, and a minor.' 'I don't believe you. Let's see your license.' 'I don't think that's appropriate.' 'What, you don't trust me? But I'm a cop.' Okay, here.' So I hand him my ID. 'Oh, you live in such and such.' 'I live there.' 'Let me drive you home later.' 'I'm sorry. I don't really feel comfortable with that. I don't know you.' 'Give me your phone number.' 'Why?' 'I don't feel comfortable doing that.' 'Unlock your phone and give it to me, or I'll arrest you for loitering.' At that point, I genuinely freaked out and didn't know if he would actually do that, and my dumbass gave him my unlocked phone, and he called himself and saved my number. After that, he texted me repeatedly, to which I told him to leave me alone, and that it was highly inappropriate that he was flirting with a minor, and that if need be, I will use these texts as proof if he threatens to harass me. And then he responds telling me that that's a bad move, and that he knows where I live, and then I blocked his number, and he left me alone. Fast forward to a few months from then, he somehow finds me on Facebook even though my account wasn't linked to my number, and starts messaging me, to which I once again respond this is his last warning, and that he better leave me alone or I'll report him, to which he told me I won't be a minor forever, and I blocked him. So, to the police officer who used his authority to make me uncomfortable and give him my phone number, please do not reach out to me again. I look back now and cringe at the fact that I was so stupid and thought that he could have gotten away with arresting me for loitering. But yeah, it was definitely very uncomfortable. Back when I was 19 and in college in Las Vegas, I received a call from my now ex's sister. She had gone out the night before and gotten a little bit drunk, and was attacked and raped by 3 guys, then ended up in the drunk tank. This bit is important since she asked me to pick her up where the police were dropping her off. Where the police were dropping her off was the worst area in Las Vegas at the time. Basically where the illegal streetwalkers and drug deals go down. Fairly certain the police just thought she was a prostitute who had a bad night, but didn't have anything to book her on other than drunken and disorderly. And no, she wasn't nor ever was a prostitute. I drove to this area and found a place to park. I had never been in this area before,
and had to get out to try to find where she was going to be dropped off. The hair on the back of my neck started standing as I could see the cross-section she had referenced ahead of me. I don't see her or the cops yet. To my right was a fairly dark alley, which is rare in Las Vegas due to, it being in the middle of the desert and most of the buildings are spread out. Out of this alley, I hear a man start pleading for help. This is where the absolute dread feeling in the pit of my stomach just turned to full-on nope. I turned around to get my car and drive to where I needed to be. As I began to walk away, the same voice from the alley started cussing me out. And while it had been over 15 years, I still remember the venom dripping from the voice as he said, "Fine, you're not worth fucking anyways." As I drive back, I see my ex-sister huddled on the curb next to a cop car. The cops leave without a word to me. She's in pretty bad shape, wants to get home. She's violently ill in my car, but thankfully I had a plastic tub she was able to use for the vomit. She refused to go to the hospital. She did get tested for STDs later. I left her in the care of her mom and brother. For this one, to the creep in the alley and the cops that really did a shit job that day, let's never meet.
So for context, my front door faces the corner of their house, and I can see part of the front yard and back. One of the wilder moments I have of my neighbor, Beth, is when her youngest son of 3, Damien, I think he was 11 at the time, came over and shyly knocked on the door. I was the one to answer and looked down at him and asked him what's up. He looks at me and says, "Can I borrow your phone?" Barely as soon as the words left his mouth, something catches my eye, and I focus over his shoulder to see Frank, the oldest, who was 20, fly back and land on the ground. I hear an angry yell, and Louis, who is 16, rushes out and punches Frank. By now, Mom can hear the fighting and starts to call 911 and stands next to me to watch. Frank shoves Louis away, and just then, Beth runs out and starts shrieking at Frank to stop. He swoops down and gets a brick from their stepping path and throws it at her. He missed. Beth stopped screaming, and Louis tries to punch Frank again. And then Frank grabs Damien's skateboard and flung it at him. He missed again, and the skateboard went through the front window, breaking it. There's more screaming, but then Frank runs back towards the house, snatches Damien's baseball bat, and jumps through the broken window and disappeared into the house. Beth and Louie come back over, and we waited for the cops. We started hearing repeated shattering noises, things getting broken, impact sounds. The police come, and he splints once more where he hopped the brick wall into my yard and then to the people behind me. They eventually caught him on the next block over. Once the cops confirmed that he was arrested, Damien, Louie, and Beth head back inside. Not too long after, Damien comes back over while Louie and Beth were giving their statements. He looked absolutely crushed. I asked him what was broken, and what he told me broke my heart. My computer tower, my monitor, my TV, and the Xbox 360 that I had given him for Christmas once I got my PS4. I couldn't believe it. What a scumbag. Beth told me later that Frank said he did it because Damien had asked us to call the cops. He was also coming down from a bender on cocaine, which explains, well, everything.
This is my second part of my encounter with these brothers. I wrote an earlier post about my first encounter, and I recommend that you read them first. Totally up to you, though. A week or so has passed since the guy had lurked outside my house. I was busy working and didn't have much time for anything else, though I had the episode fresh in my mind every time I went to bed. That Friday after work, I was going to have some friends over for food and game night, so I stopped by a store to get some groceries. As I stepped out of my car, I could see someone from the corner of my eye, mostly because this person had bright red and pink clothes on. As I turned to walk in, I saw him. He was on a bench, looking at me with a smirk on his face. The chills that I got there and then is indescribable. I walked as fast as I could into the store and grabbed the things that I needed before I hurried back to my car. I couldn't see him anywhere until I left the parking lot. He was standing with his bike, behind a building, peeking around the corner. As I passed him, our eyes met for a split second before I stepped on the gas to get away from there. That same night after my guests had left, I went to bed and was lying in my bed checking my Facebook, my Snapchat, and Twitter. Yeah, the whole routine before going to sleep. I heard my cousin unlocking the front door before locking it, and I heard him walking upstairs to his apartment. At least I knew he was home. I could finally go to sleep. I must have been half asleep and awake when I heard someone knocking on one of the windows in my living room. My heart was beating so fast in my chest, and I froze. It quickly went from knocking to pounding. I was sure this person would soon break the window. Of course, the first thought that hit me was that it was the same guy was back. He had seen me at the store now. He was back to terrorize me some more. Then the knocking moved to my bedroom window. While knocking, he started shouting, "Open up! I know you're home!" I was so scared. I can't even describe how scared I was. He repeated the sentence while slamming his hands against the window. I'm not too religious, but at that moment, I was praying to all kinds of gods. I slowly picked up my phone, about to call my cousin, when my cousin texted me. "Just pretend that you're not there, and he'll go away," is what he wrote me. That is when I understood that the guy that was out there was for my cousin, which meant that my cousin would have met them at the local bar, or wherever he had been. I wrote back a short F you to my cousin. The guy outside my window, however, just kept going. He knocked on all my windows and rang my doorbell for about 10 to 15 minutes before it got quiet. I went out to the kitchen just in time to see him leave, and when he was under the streetlight, I could see it had been the brother of the first guy. The day after, my cousin told me that he had met him at a party, and they had argued, and he followed him home. I do believe that my cousin was lying, though. My cousin was an on and off relationship with drugs. This was within a period where he was on. My guess is that he had gotten some drugs from the guy that he didn't want to pay for the whole amount of. What happened the day after makes me even more sure about this, because the same afternoon he was back. He rang the doorbell, and I opened, and it was after I opened I knew who it was, or else I probably wouldn't have opened it. He asked me for my cousin. He said my cousin owed him something. I told him my cousin lived upstairs, and that he had his own doorbell. I also knew my cousin had just left, so I told him this. Before he left, I got tougher than I have ever been before. I took a deep breath before I let him know that it was not nice to knock on people's windows during the night, and that he had scared me. He actually said he was sorry, and that he wouldn't do it again. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was out on my daily run with my music in my ears, and not really thinking much about it, nor really paying attention to anything but the road in front of me, when I had to stop to tie my shoelaces. As I got up, I could see the guy from the first night standing at the top of a hill with his bike, and he was looking directly at me. I got back up and started running again, but this time I looked over my shoulder, and to my surprise, he was already getting closer to me. I took a route where I knew there would be more people, but that was a bit longer. After changing directions, I looked over my shoulder again, and he was even closer. I begged that I would see someone I knew so that I could stop and talk to them and let him pass. But when he was right behind me, I had still not seen anyone at all. However, I saw a man out walking his dog and stopped in front of them. I said I thought his dog was cute, and he let me pet it. The guy passed us on his bike, but I could see that he kept looking at me over his shoulder, all while he had the crazy smirk on his face. The man with the dog asked if I was okay. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I just told him yes. I couldn't see the stalker or his bike anywhere, but I still decided to run back and take my original planned route. I was almost at home when I spotted him at the bus stop. Leaned over his bike, looking down on what probably was his phone. I crossed the street and looked over my shoulder to see if he saw me. I thought I had made it home unnoticed, Still, I locked the door behind me as soon as I was inside at home. But when I was in the kitchen getting something to drink, I could see him on his bike, slowly moving, passing my driveway, looking at my house before disappearing behind some trees. I went and took a shower, and after I was going to relax and click around on the web, I started by checking my Facebook. I could see that I had a new friend request. I clicked on it, and guess who it was? Yep, it was him. I have no idea how he found my name or my Facebook, but as I wrote in my first post, I live in a small town. It wouldn't have taken him much time to find out who I am. He might even have read it on my mailbox. I did not add him as a friend, though. A couple of days later, while I was at work, I got messages on my messenger. It said that someone had asked to send me a message. When I opened it up, there his name was again. I clicked on decline. No way, dude. He tried to get in contact with me over Messenger for about a week, and I blocked him. After this, one day I came home to a note on my door. It said, "Add me on Facebook," and his name, and made up last name. I think it was Bond or something like that. I saved the note and later handed it over to the police, when the stalking got a bit too much at least. His brother never came back to the house, but one time the both of them was walking behind me when I was out walking with some friends, just looking at us. His brother also once asked me why I didn't want to add them on Facebook, and why I didn't talk to his brother. I never replied to any of them. I finally got my cousin to tell them to chill on the stalking. This is when it went from bad to worse, with daily visits from at least one of them, but mostly the first guy. I think the brother might have showed up to where I was like 3 times. The first visitor started hanging around outside my office, gym, house, anywhere I was really. It got really intense. Of course, I started telling more people about this, and all of them told me to contact the police, which I did. I gave them the note, the messenger messages. I told them about the stalking, and said I had witnesses. They promised me that they would keep an eye on him, and told me that it was not his first time doing these things. That didn't calm me at all. Why didn't they just get him some help? So the stalking that he did went on for another month, and it seemed like he just enjoyed the attention the police gave him, because the days they told him to stop, he just came back an extra time. Finally, my fiancée came home from work, and the two of us was out at a restaurant eating one night. I had, of course, told him about the stalking. We were about to leave when we saw the guy standing outside the restaurant. My fiancée went straight out the door and over to him. I didn't hear everything that was said, but I heard my fiancée telling the guy he would put his foot up somewhere. After that, I only saw the guy stalking me like 3 times. My fiancé is a strong dude, but I don't know if it was that, or that the guy just finally gave up, or what. I just hoped it would stay that way, even after my fiancé left for work. Fortunately, it did. I have seen the 2 brothers around town since, but I hope that I never meet them again. So, guys, let's not meet ever again.
When I was in 6th grade, I met R. He bullied me relentlessly. He would punch me, verbally abuse me, all 9 yards. But somehow, I became friends with him. I have no idea how. After he stopped bullying me, nothing bad really happened till I reached the 7th grade. I made a new friend named Leslie. We're still friends to this day, and I love her to death. Anyways, R and Leslie and I all were in the same friend group as each other on the bus, since we all lived in the same neighborhood. R started to exhibit some really weird behaviors. On the bus, he would take a pencil, lead to his skin, and cut himself, or attempt to at least. At this point in time, I myself was struggling with self-harm and suicidal behavior, so this pissed me off. I told him off, and he told me it was the demons that made him do it. Weird, I know. This was also when Pokemon Go was really popular, and on more than one occasion I'd be outside my house, because I liked to make musical outside. And his car would pull up in front of my house, stay there for about 10 minutes, and then drive away. Every time I would confront R about it, he would say, "Oh, we were just hunting Pokemon." Yeah, right, dude. He started to date my friend N. He would force her to kiss him when she wasn't comfortable with it. It was constantly taking advantage of her mental state since she had autism. They broke up eventually. In 8th grade, my homeroom teacher hands me a note. He says some kid gave it to him, and it had my name on it, so I opened it and read it. It basically said, "OP, I'm in love with you. I would kill for you. I would shoot and stab everyone for you. If you don't like me back, I'm going to end myself." Along those lines. And I freaked out. Up until that point, I had a crush on him. I didn't anymore. I went to the counselor, I can't remember her name, and gave her the note. He wasn't there for a week and came back acting as if nothing happened. This is where it gets juicy. Fast forward to 9th grade, aka last year in 2017, in October. He got on the bus, and I moved out of the way so he could sit down since we sat together. He turned to me and said, which I remember word for word, "Last night I had a dream about you, OP. I dreamt I was stabbing you in your back, your blood on my hands, and you dying in my arms." I freaked out and laughed it off, thinking he was just joking. He wasn't. He turned to a page in his book, and it was a drawing of him stabbing me, down to my scarred facial expression and everything. I freaked out and told the counselor, Miss S. She immediately told me to write a statement, so I did. I went home and my mom got a call from Mr. B, who told her what had happened. They wanted her in the school the next day for a meeting. This is where it gets fuzzy for me, since my brain tried to block this all out, since this was a traumatic moment for me. I told the administration, my mom, Miss S, and Miss R what had happened. They told me that they would take care of it. So I went along the school day and went home. He still rode my bus. So I started to sit way in the back because I was terrified of him and scared that he would hurt me. I suffer from PTSD, from abuse, and a shooting I was in as a child. Paranoia, suicidal thoughts, and self-harm behavior. My mental state deteriorated. I started to self-harm again, and I had to be admitted to a hospital in January of 2018. He was also admitted to the same hospital, different times apart. He was still on my bus 3 months later after the incident. My mom was furious. She's a mama bear, and took me down to school early. This was the following conversation between Mom, Mr. B, and Mr. G. I didn't say much. "Mom, why is R still on OP's bus?" Mr. B told her, "Because we don't see any reason to take him off her bus." My mom, "He threatened to kill her. That's not a reason in itself." Keep in mind, R admitted to threatening me and showed them the drawing. Mr. G, "We don't see him as a threat." This is heavily important later. Mom, "So he threatened to kill someone. No disciplinary action happened. And he has to stay on his victim's bus." She turned to me. "It's like we're in the Twilight Zone." Yes, she actually said that. Mr. G sighs. "Ma'am, there's nothing that we can do. He's legally supposed to ride that particular bus." Mom, "OP is a sitting duck on that bus if he chooses to bring a weapon." Mr. G sighs. "Well, what can we do?" The following week, with my mom harassing them daily, he was finally off my bus. A few weeks later, R reported to them we were not allowed to go near each other, that I was purposely walking towards him and sitting at the same table as him. So I was called into a meeting with my mom, both counselors, and the administration. This is just a rundown, Mrs. S. We brought this guy in here today because R was reported that OP purposely has been sitting at the same breakfast table as him and walking near him. I said, "No, I sat at that table because that's where I've sat since September, and that's where my friends are. I walk near him so I can get to class on time without being tardy." Mrs. R, "Well, it's empowering as a woman to avoid your abuser and walk a different route to sit at a different table." This pissed me off to no extent, and it still does. I don't remember anything after that because I broke down crying. I shut down completely and pulled my head into my lap. I do remember my mom yelling at the counselors and administrators because of this. I never saw R again after that. Fast forward to this year, 2018, I'm a 10th grader now, in October. I get the news from a mutual friend of ours that he was stalking her and threatened to shoot up the school, and was now in jail. Remember how I said that Mr. G said he wasn't a threat? It's now March, and he's expelled and is on probation. He still lives in my neighborhood, but if I ever need to, or if he talks to me again, I will not hesitate to get a restraining order and press charges. R, let's not meet ever again.
So this all takes place in August of last year, right before I moved to a different state for school. This story involves myself, 18 at the time, and my sister and cousin, both 14. And on the day in question, we decided to go and do what we call an Uzi adventure, where we basically get in the car and drive until we find something to do. This day, we decided to go to Target, but instead of the one we usually go to, we decided to go to a different one that was in the south end of the city that we lived near. A little background about the area that I live in. I grew up most of my life just outside of Detroit. Bigger area when I was in high school. The part of this area I lived in was more of the suburban/downtown side, but on the south end. It was well known that all of the weird and dangerous people lived down there. Anyways, for some reason, I still don't know why we decided to go to the South Target instead of our usual one. We got there, and my sister and cousin got a couple of things for school while I just picked up a CD. We check out, and we go out to the car, and we see a green Chevy Trailblazer is now parked right next to my car. I didn't notice anything outside of the fact that the driver's seat was reclined all the way back. The window was slightly open, and it looked like someone was sleeping in the car. My sister gets into the passenger seat, and my cousin right behind her. And literally the second she got in the car, she said, "Drive. Drive now." I didn't really think much, though, because she didn't sound panicked or anything. So I drive, and once we pull onto the main road, she told me that she saw an old man lying in the driver's seat, jerking off to people walking past. More specifically, children and their moms walking past. My cousin then said that she saw him too, and we were of course freaked out and tried to decide what we should do. We ended up pulling over in a Staples parking lot and sitting there trying to decide if we should call the cops. My sister is crying at this point and having an anxiety attack because she thought she'd get in trouble with her parents for calling the cops. Eventually, I convinced my cousin to call 911 and put in a report because my sister was still crying about not wanting to call the cops, and I suck at phone calls. Maybe half an hour or something after the incident, we get a call from the police pretty much telling us they found him in the car with his pants off and his tic-tac out, and that since he was a repeat offender and did this apparently extremely often, we needed to come to the station to file an official report. We tried to convince them to allow us to make it at the Target parking lot since they were still there, but they wouldn't allow it. At this point, our parents had no idea what was going on, and I'm not sure we wanted them, specifically my aunt, to know because she is known to blow stuff extremely out of proportion and would probably never let my cousin out of the house ever again. But now that we're going to be at the station, we had no other choice but to tell them. So we tell our parents and my mom, dad, brother, aunt, uncle, and cousin to meet us all at the station. I remember that there was maybe 1 or 2 POs on duty that night, and we had to wait a couple of hours while they called the detective at his house and ended up interviewing us in his pajamas in the fax room. Months later, I was at school in another state when we all got subpoenas to come to court. We ended up having to go to court 2 separate times, and I had to fly home for a month or 2 the second time because he appealed or something before eventually pleading guilty the second time around. And he's now out of parole after serving pretty much no time in jail. To end this story off, we don't go to that Target anymore, and the last that I've heard about this was a call from the parole officer asking pretty much my viewpoint, and if I go to therapy because of it. I guess on a lighter note though, because my family and I have warped sense of humor, we now refer to it as the pickle tickler incident. Anyways, To the 74-year-old man we found tickling your pickle in the car to little kids and caused us to spend hours at the police station. Let's not meet ever again.
This started back in 2015, maybe 2016-ish. I try to blur most of his identity from my memory. During this time, a good friend of mine was working for a local chain restaurant, and one afternoon she invited me and another friend to come by for a St. Patty's Day drink after our shift at work. When we arrived, all fun and dandy, she got a couple of drinks, and everyone there was nice and respectful. Next thing I know, she comes over and points to a group of guys at the bar that were around my age, saying that they really want to say hi, so they asked me to come over. Let's just say this would have been my first red flag. But I was young and loved meeting new people and thought, hey, these guys look innocent enough. Fast forward a few months later, and me and my friends were now really close with this group of 3 guys. Alec, the sweet one, James, the weird one, and Dan, the main story. We spent a ton of time together, always laughing and nothing awkward. These guys felt like brothers. A few weeks later, this Dan decided to profess his affection for me via Facebook Messenger. After politely telling me that I saw him more as a brother rather than a lover, he then decided to threaten me by saying he would, and I quote, "kill myself if you don't date me." Safe to say that I decided it was best to take some space from this whole group. After a few weeks of ignoring messages and asking for space, I finally caved and decided to talk it out, hoping things would maybe be normal again. Boy, was I mistaken. Alec and James slowly backed off and appreciated my space. To this day, I respect them for doing this while still being friends with Dan. On the other side of things, Dan continued to message me, telling me he missed me and that I was like a sister to him. The messages became more persistent than ever after multiple back and forths, asking him to leave me alone. He still refused to acknowledge that I no longer wanted contact. It got back to the extent that I had to block him on everything so that I wouldn't receive texts, Insta DMs, and messages on all platforms. Then he took it to the next level. Dan decided to change his phone number. Not once, not twice, 4 times. All so that he could message me. I couldn't believe the extent that he would go just to get me back as a friend, even after multiple threats that I would call the cops. On top of changing phone numbers, he would create new Facebook and Instagram pages, changing his name, using fake images or old ones. I have at least 2 to 5 profiles blocked on my Insta and Facebook. Finally, I thought it was over, until I received a message from my 2 friends Megan and Ashley, along with calls from both of my sisters. Hey, so is Dan trying to add me on Insta? My middle sister, Beth, even got messages saying, "Hey, why won't Gina talk to me?" Along with multiples of the same messages to all of them. I was fucking fuming. It's one thing to harass me, but now, my family? Now I'm bringing it to my parents, who are not only scared for me, but scared he will show up at the house. He knew where I lived at the time. 2 years of this went by before I decided to do something. Now I know people may think, why did you wait so long? But it was really hard for me, and because I blocked and deleted so many messages, I didn't feel like I had the evidence to go to the police and file for harassment, as much as I wanted to. In early 2016, I noticed a profile. It was old pics of Dan, and all of his Facebook friends were youngish girls. I took a video of it and sent it to my sister to warn them in case he tried to contact them. In 2016, I met my current boyfriend, Harrison, my best friend and #1 fan. Luckily, during this, Dan only tried to add me on Insta once. I then deleted and never heard from him again. I assumed at this point he found a girl or realized he needed help. In October of 2018, everything changed. A new guy started at my job who looked exactly like this guy. This was super triggering, so I texted Harrison right away so he could help me calm down. Not even 2 minutes later, he goes, "Have you Googled Dan recently?" Which of course I haven't. So of course I did. My jaw dropped. Dan pleaded guilty last year to incitement of a minor. I started shaking. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had to look up 5+ articles to believe it. I couldn't process whether I was feeling guilty for not seeing this sooner or if I felt relief. I called my mom and cried. I couldn't process this. I spent so much of my life being mentally harassed by someone, and for some reason blamed myself for this happening. I saw this page. I filmed it. I could have done something. I could have prevented this. Dan's sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. This is my letter to him. Dear Dan, how could you? How could you hurt so many people? This girl, her family, your family. I'm still in shock, and I'm mad. You've done so much damage to so many good people. You've scarred families, friends, co-workers. For what? You are lonely. I hope you enjoy being lonely forever. Enjoy the cold walls of your cell. They match your heart. I wish I could see you one more time. I want to look you in the fucking eyes. I want an answer. Why? Why did you make me feel so scared? Why did you make this little girl believe you? Why? If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.